Dearest church family, it is great to once again share some thoughts with you. I hope that you have had a good week. I know the church is in mourning after the passing of Larry. I don't know if it's mourning or rejoicing that he's with the Father in heaven. And everything that we're talking about, every time we talk about God's word, we are always mindful about this moment that we'll actually be with the Lord. So it's such a difficult thing because we are sad that he's moved on from us, but we're so happy for him that he is finally at peace and that he managed to serve his God right up to the very end. We are praying for you guys. We are very mindful of the discomfort that death causes. We are busy still talking about how to make disciples. We've spoken about Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, and there were some cool practical things there that we could talk about. We spoke about Paul. And now we're talking about Jesus, and we're just using one of the encounters that he had with this special lady, the woman at the well. And what is slightly different with this encounter, between this encounter and the encounter that Philip had with the eunuch, is that the eunuch was already seeking. He was already a seeker looking for God. But this lady that Jesus approaches in the book of John chapter 4, if you'd like to turn there, this lady I call a sinner. Most of the people that will come across in our lives generally, maybe if we could look at some of this, if there were stats about it, but most of the people, let's say 80% of the people that we connect with or try to connect with would be people that are considered sinners. And the idea that I try to portray regarding that, and this is just my experience, okay, and the idea that I try to portray of a sinner is somebody who is feeling empty, who feels a need to have a void filled in their lives, and they're trying all kinds of other things to fill that void. Like it's been said before, I think it was Blaise Pascal or Mark Twain or one of those guys that said, within the heart of man is a God-shaped void that cannot be filled by anything else except God. So a sinner is a person who feels that void, is concerned about it, and would like to do something about it but don't know how, until somebody comes along, points at the void, reveals the pain and the cause, and provides the remedy, which is God. And to get to that point, you've got to build some rapport and some relationship with that person in order to reveal the void. And that is what Jesus is showing us here. Whereas a seeker is somebody who says, I already know I need God. I already know I want God. I'm looking for him. I have prayed about him. I am even maybe reading scriptures about him. And so it's easier to convert a seeker than it is a sinner. And those are just terms that I use to describe the types of people that we will meet in our lives. And so Jesus is engaging here with what I call a sinner, and he engages her in Samaria. He was in Judea. He's on his way to Galilee. He wants to get away from the Pharisees, and he has to go through Samaria. He could have gone around on the other side of the Jordan, taken a longer route around, like many Jews did, because they didn't want to be associated with the Samaritans, and the Samaritans also didn't want the Jews on their land. So Jesus, he doesn't play games. He goes straight through Samaria, and I believe that that was by God's appointment, that Jesus, being God, could foresee that he would meet this lady on this journey. So he stops by Jacob's well. It's 12 a.m. and he is thirsty, and the disciples are going into town, Sychar, to go and buy some food. This lady comes along. He asks her for a cup of water, and she's blown away, because why would a Jew even talk to her? So it's very interesting how this conversation plays out. Jesus starts talking to her about spiritual water. She doesn't understand that. She still thinks it's physical water. And Jesus goes on in this conversation with her, but she still doesn't understand. So after Jesus has thrown out the idea of spiritual water, eternal water, and Jesus is referring to himself, he's referring to the gospel, he's referring to the gift of God that is available now to people who are empty and lost, which I think clearly she was, as we'll see today, and she still doesn't get it. So they go back and forth and back and forth, and she speaks about physical water, Jesus speaks about spiritual water, and she just doesn't get it. But then eventually, interestingly, she says, okay, yes, I want this spiritual water that you're talking about. Or I want this water that you're talking about. But still she doesn't fully understand. She thinks it's going to be like some type of special water so that she will never have to come back to the well again. She thinks that it's going to be water that she can drink that will just quench her thirst like forever, it seems like. So she still doesn't get the spiritual idea that Jesus has in mind. And that's where we stopped last week. And the question was, well, what does Jesus do from here on? And so we are in chapter 4 and verse 16. So we're just going to read 2 verses and look at what Jesus does. He cuts straight to the nerve. He goes deep. He hits hard. He goes straight for the throttle. He goes straight for this big hole in her heart. Listen to the text. He told her, this is Jesus, verse 16, John chapter 4, go call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. It's very interesting that Jesus just spoke about water. She spoke about water. The whole conversation has been about something in common, the water. They're sitting by a well. And suddenly Jesus interrupts this whole conversation with questions about her husband. Maybe at first, as we will see just now, maybe at first she thought, maybe this man is interested in me, right? Because it seems like if she's had 5 husbands, then she is quite an immoral woman. What is Jesus doing here? Jesus goes in for the kill. He hits the nerve. That's what he does. I call it the nerve. You know when you go to the dentist and they want to pull that tooth. At one time I had such a insane headache, a toothache, that I was willing to do anything. I eventually said to Alfreda, maybe I need to go get a plant to smoke or something to take away this pain, because it's unbearable. And when that dentist the next morning drilled into my tooth and got the nerve, the source of the pain and the discomfort, I said to her, I want to see that thing. And she took it out and she showed me what that thing looked like. That gave me so much pain. Jesus is a dentist here. He's going to the very nerve, to the very source of pain. He switches from water to marriage. Right? From H to O to her sin. Her relationship with men was the most sensitive part of her life. It was the area, and Jesus knew this. You and I, we don't know it, so we've got to go digging for it, but he knew that was her problem. Jesus knew why she needed living water. She was in a bad spiritual condition. According to the Jews, the most immoral of women were married 2 or 3 times. To be married 5 times and then to live with another man that you're not married to is the worst type of godlessness. This was the most ungodly woman in the mind of a Jew. She came to draw water alone. Why? I suspect because the townswoman had rejected her. She was an outcast. She was an outsider with a sinful life. She boarded and fell just short of prostitution, in my understanding. And so when Jesus hit the nerve of her life, he was essentially encroaching on her privacy. He was entering the recesses of her heart. He was getting to the very reason why she needed living water. He immediately took her attention away from her need for physical water to make her realize her own drought. What was Jesus doing here? It seems to me like he shocked her into a spiritual frame of mind by pointing towards her morality. You see, her morality revealed her need for God. Her morality had cost her so much. It had alienated her from people. It had caused her hurt and pain in her heart and that of the men that she had been with. In a sense, Jesus was saying to her here, you want the living water? Let us talk about your sin. You said you wanted the living water. So let's talk about your sin, the source of your drought. You said that I don't have a vessel to put H2O in from the well. Yet let's talk about your vessel, your heart, your soul, and see if it can carry the living water that I have to offer. She wanted physical water. Jesus knew she actually needed spiritual water. She didn't know it, but she was thirsting for something that would fill her empty life. And she felt empty because of her sin. And the only way that Jesus could help her clearly see what the issue at hand was to point to her sin. Jesus is teaching us something here about human nature. He's showing us that when you get to the nerve of a person, the root of his pain, you will see that sin caused it. I had just an amazing experience with a man that I've been teaching the gospel. And I interviewed him on my podcast this past week, and he spoke about his experience. This was a man that is perhaps the man with the most sin I've ever experienced. A man that was orphaned, that has been a sex slave, that was lived on the streets, that did very interesting things to try and survive, and a person that is very ill, that's HIV positive, a person that was in a homosexual relationship for more than 21 years, that is now with a lady that he's not married to, but yet he's turning and wanting to come to Christ. And when you talk to him, the goal is to get to the nerve of his emptiness, to get to the nerve of his problem. And his problem started because he was orphaned, and he's always wrestled with that because that wasn't his decision. Right? But when you get to the nerve of the thing that really concerns him, when you get to the heart of where his pain comes from, it comes from the fact that his parents deserted him. And why did they desert him? Because they were sinners and they were living in sin and they didn't want to do the will of God. So the root of his pain, even though it wasn't caused by him, was the fact that his parents sinned. Ladies and gentlemen, our pain, our emptiness, the void in our hearts always go back to sin. So when you meet a sinner, you have to get to the sin that caused them to feel pain. And when you get there, you can start helping them. I hope that you get that. And that's what Jesus is doing here. They've got a conversation about water, and then Jesus goes to the sin. Immediately he goes to the sin. Because when you get to the sin, you get to the root cause of why this person is in pain. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a fact. Every person out there in the world that is not in Christ has pain. Whether they accept that, acknowledge that, doesn't matter. They have pain. And our goal is to help them realize why they are in pain. So we've got to get to the pain, and then we can help them see why they're in pain, which is the sin. So people need to realize that sin has caused their pain and emptiness. Once they realize that, you can introduce them to the solution, and the solution is Jesus Christ. And we know that every person on the planet, Romans 3 verse 23, is a sinner. And every sinner has pain and emptiness, whether they know it or not, whether they acknowledge it or not. We need to know this fact when we make disciples. Our goal is to gain access to people's moral recesses of their heart. And we do this so that we can show them they are sick, tell them why they are, and then introduce them to the magic potion, which is Jesus Christ and his living water. And how did this woman respond to Jesus' personal intrusion? How did this woman respond? I mean, so let's just recap this quickly. And I'm sorry that I'm recapping the whole time, but I would like us to get sort of how this is flowing. Jesus talks to her about something common, water. Something they have in common is water. Both are sitting by a well. She talks about physical water. He talks about spiritual water. She doesn't get spiritual talk. So he goes directly for the kill. He talks about a sin. He knew what a sin was. Okay? You and we're going to have to do some digging to get out, to find that out, because we're not Jesus, okay? But once he got there, he told her, I know this is your problem. I know this is where your pain is. And what would you assume would happen now? That she would go on her knees, fall down in tears and cry and say, Lord, please heal me. Yes, my sin, What does she do? Listen to the text, verse 19 to 20. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you're a prophet. In other words, yeah, you know what? She's interested. She realizes, I'm talking to somebody that knows what's cutting here. But listen to what she says. She says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Now think about it. What is she doing here? For the first time, she realizes that she is now in a spiritual conversation. Isn't Jesus a genius? If you want people to wake up spiritually, then you introduce morality. She was going on about water, Jesus identifies her sin, and boom, she brings in religious talk. What Jesus said about her was true. She knew it. She knew that this man was from God. And so she did what most sinners do when they realize they find themselves in a spiritual conversation. They talk about religion and doctrine. Ladies and gentlemen, as I experienced this the whole time. The moment I start talking to people about Jesus and about sin, they start talking about religion and doctrine. Do you see what she does here? She quickly diverted the attention off of herself by talking about religion. Well, let's talk about this mountain. Let's talk about the ancient debate between the Jews and the Samaritans. Let's not talk about my sin. Jesus points at her sin. She realizes this and she points towards religion. She deflects. She doesn't answer Jesus. She feels uncomfortable with Jesus' truth, which was the full truth, and she changes the subject. She brings up the ancient doctrinal debate, and it is about a mountain, about Mount Gerizim, which was close by the way. Now, there are loads of truth in this dialogue. Let me point out two things. First, we must expect that people will not feel comfortable about their sin. Nobody likes to talk about their moral failures. We need to know that when we engage with people. Therefore, we need to be prepared for it. We need to have a non-condemnatory attitude. The more judgmental we are, the less people will be free to talk about their sin. And this is very, very important. I'm just going to try and repeat this. Okay. The root cause of people's pain and emptiness is sin. Okay. So we need to talk to people about that. So if you want people to connect with Christ, you have to start there with the root cause of their sin. Ladies and gentlemen, people are not going to talk to us about their sin if they feel that we are going to judge them. So we have to create a comfortable environment where we can say to people, man, you know what, there's nothing that you can say that's going to make me walk away from you. There's nothing that you can say that's going to change my mind about you. We've got to make people feel comfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, I had this past week one of the most uncomfortable, when we talk about some of the sin that I really struggle with personally as a man, is homosexuality. Man between man. And what's even worse for me is when you sell your body to a man as a man. That for me is very hard. My brain cannot comprehend that. And this past week, I had a man who told that to me. Somebody who I'm busy trying to teach about Jesus. He told me that. And I was in that moment, in my flesh, trying to distance myself from him. But I had to engage him like Jesus would have. And not push him away like everybody else has. Like the times that he has walked into churches and people have pushed him away. I had to stick it out and make him feel comfortable to talk to me, because if he couldn't talk to me, how could I help him out of that pit? This is something that Paul did well. Paul called himself in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 15, the worst of sinners. Think about that. And I don't think he just wrote that in his letter. I think he actually told that to people when he was in dialogue with them. In other words, Paul would say to people, hey man, I know you've got sin. Man, I've done a lot of stuff worse than you. I've killed people. I've killed Christians. I've allowed the death and the stoning of a man by the name of Stephen that had a face like an angel. Man, so there's no sin that you can tell me about that Jesus' grace is not big enough. What does that do to you when you talk to somebody like that? Then that person feels like, wow, I actually can feel free to talk to you about the mess in my life. But if you go like, I hope that you're not a homosexual. I hope that you haven't been a bad person. I hope that you don't get drunk over weekends. I hope that you don't have any tattoos hidden beneath that sleeve of yours. I hope that you've never smacked your wife. You know, if we go with that attitude and try to teach people about Jesus, they're never going to be open about their sin. So we're never going to get to the root cause of their pain, and we're never going to show them why they're in pain, and we're never going to be able to bring them to Jesus and show them what the grace of Christ is all about. So we've got to help people to feel comfortable talking about their sin. So the second thing I just want to point out here is that in spiritual discussions, people would far rather speak about religion than about their own sin. Okay? The temptation is going to be there. Sinners want to talk about churches and stuff. They don't want to talk about their sin. And when I say religion, I refer to denominational differences, church issues, doctrinal debates, religious controversies, where people want to say to you, yeah, when I grew up, I was in a Catholic church and there was this issue and that issue. Or, you know, I used to go down to the road to the Baptist church, but you know what, this and that happened there. You'll always find people wanting to start talking church and stuff like that. It's what this woman is doing. She deflects. She says, I don't want to talk about my sin. Let's talk about the mountain. Which mountain? You get that? Okay. So instead of addressing a sin, she wants to talk about the differences between Jews and Samaritans. She wants to go on about the debate. Let's have a debate. Okay. She wants to know about which mountain is the correct place to worship God. And we need to be mindful and careful of this. The goal of making disciples is not to discuss the issues of bad Christianity, about church politics, about denominational sectarianism. We've got to be very clear about that. The goal of making disciples is to help people connect with Jesus and follow him for life. Jesus doesn't meet people in perfect religion. He meets people where sin crosses a repentant heart. That's why it's more important to talk about the sin than to talk about the religion. There is a place for religious talk, but we need to reserve that for a later stage. The externals can be dealt with later, but the focus needs to be on the internals. Oh yeah, you want to talk about this church, this doctrine, how you were brought up, blah, blah, blah. You want to talk about that bad pastor or about the Pope or whatever. Yeah, those are things that we can talk about. But what is the condition of your heart? What's happening in your life? How does Jesus handle this lady's answer? Her change of subject. Let's learn from the master, ladies and gentlemen. In chapter 4, verse 21, Jesus says, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." What is he doing? It's not about mountains. The time is coming, it's not going to be about mountains. But secondly, he says, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet, a time is coming, yet as if it's not the big issue here, okay, whether the Jews are right or not. Yet, a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. Jesus starts off his answer by giving her a prophecy and a declaration. A prophecy because Jesus tells her that she would soon worship God in a different way. Jesus was telling her that her religion would drastically change soon. You're concerned about which mountain? Neither. You're going to worship him wherever you go. But Jesus also gives her a declaration that a new faith, a new religion was emerging that isn't about the place of worship. Soon the geographical location of the temple won't matter anymore, because people's bodies, their hearts, would become the temple of God. And that is how God's message would spread throughout the world. That would bring an end to the ancient debate between Jews and Samaritans. She wants to talk about the place of worship, but Jesus directs her towards the object of worship. It's not about the mountain, but about God and his nature, about his spirit. Jesus takes her attention away from the temple on a mountain to her own temple, to her own heart, to her own worship. Soon she would worship God in a way that doesn't care where it is, but about who she's worshiping and how she does it. It is not about mountains and buildings, but about God and his spirit. It's not about the Jews and the Samaritans, but about Jesus the Messiah, who comes to save the whole world. Yet, Jesus doesn't ignore her concern about which temple on which mountain to worship. He tells her that the Samaritans don't know who they're worshipping. The Messiah would not come from the Samaritans, but from the Jews. And so Jesus does take a stand for truth. And we should do the same, but we should not belabor it too much and lose focus on the Messiah. And we should allow people's questions in our presence, but not get stuck in it. And the reason why I mention it is because I've been in situations where people want to debate all the types of churches, and that's fine. I mean, there's a place for that. But in the beginning, when you're talking to a sinner, it's important to not let them lose focus and talk about how bad Christianity is and how different churches are, but get them to focus on their personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Unpack the sin first, bring healing to the heart first, and then we can talk about all of the different issues. First, connect to Jesus, right? Jesus acknowledges her question. He speaks the truth, but he elevates the nature of God and the mission of the Messiah. She wants to debate outer religion. He talks about inner spirituality, and that is key. It is easy to get stuck with people into debating different churches and different religions, and we should stand for truth, but we should not let it dominate conversations. The middle way, the best way is Jesus, right? The correct way is the content of your heart in worship and not the external form. Jesus didn't want her to convert to Judaism. He wanted her to be free from a life of sin and accept him as the Messiah. And that should be our goal too, to connect people to Jesus. That is the goal of evangelism. And I've been there, ladies and gentlemen. I've been a preacher in the church for my whole life. I have tried getting to people to church, and I get them to church, and a few months later I see they don't know Jesus. Getting to be part of my church and getting to connect with Jesus doesn't always happen simultaneously. It's easy to convert people to my church, but then they're not converted to Christ. It's very important to get people connected to Jesus. The church comes after that. We connect them to Jesus, and then we introduce them to the family. Get them to be real, to accept God from the heart. And this should be in contrast to getting them to accept all of the other doctrinal issues. Evangelism is not about the place of worship, but about the content of worship. The dialogue continues. The woman said, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. And I'd leave it at that point for us this week. Please continue wrestling with the text. There might be many other things in that text. Don't be shy to send me messages and tell me, look, this is something I saw in the text that I think is powerful when talking about evangelism. This is something Jesus did here that I think is cool. Let's wrestle with it. Jesus is teaching us here. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, have a fantastic week. Love you guys lots. And looking forward to talk with you again next week. Bye-bye.